The stop was meant to intimidate, but the truth staring back at him left him speechless. And for the first time in years, he remembered the man who saved his life. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden warmth over the quiet streets of Hillside Park, a suburban neighborhood that always seemed to exhale at the end of a school day. Tree-lined roads basked in the late afternoon light, their shadows stretching across the asphalt like long fingers of comfort. Birds chirped from the rooftops, their melodies floating lazily through the soft air. It was the kind of peaceful moment where the world felt gentle, even still. Down one of those winding streets, a silver SUV glided steadily past picket fences and parked bicycles. It wasn't flashy, a bit older, maybe 10 years old, but it was well-kept, clean, and polished in a way that suggested someone cared for it. Behind the wheel sat Malik Thompson, 17 years old, quiet and focused. With earbuds tucked under the hood of his navy blue school sweatshirt, Malik's face was calm, serious in that mature way some teenagers wear when they've seen more than people assume. His deep brown eyes scanned the road, always alert, always aware. Not paranoid, just practiced. His hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, not because he was nervous, but because his mom had drilled that into him ever since he got his learner's permit. He had just finished tutoring a younger student in algebra, a sophomore, who reminded him of himself just a couple years ago, bright but overlooked. After helping him ace his quiz, Malik had stuck around a little longer to talk about college, scholarships, life after high school. It made him feel good to pour into someone else. That's what his dad used to say, if you've got the knowledge, pass it on. Somebody passed it to you. The inside of the car still held a trace of his dad's old cologne, tucked into the upholstery like a ghost refusing to leave. A Purple Heart sticker faded slightly on the corner of the rear windshield. Below it, the license plate read, H3RO Dad, a tribute, not a boast. Malik didn't blast music like most kids his age. Today, he let the breeze drift in through the cracked window, mixing with the muffled sound of a podcast on Black excellence. A soft smile played on his lips. He was thinking about dinner, his mom's cornbread, and maybe watching an old Marvel movie later that night. There was a sense of earned peace around him, like someone who learned to move carefully through the world, not out of fear, but out of survival. Even now, on an ordinary afternoon, driving home from a good deed, there was a rhythm to how Malik moved, deliberate, measured, aware. A neighbor waved as he passed. He nodded politely, keeping one eye on the rearview mirror. As always, the town was mostly quiet, middle class, clean, a little polished at times. It was the kind of place where people said, we don't see color here, but still locked their car doors when someone like Malik walked by. But today, none of that touched him. The world was slow and soft, golden and forgiving. The air was warm with the last breaths of summer. The road ahead stretched empty, inviting. He reached down to adjust the volume. The podcast speaker was telling a story about a young black scientist who had built a drone that helped deliver food to hard-to-reach communities. Malik's mind wandered briefly to his own dream of studying engineering, maybe building something that mattered. At a stop sign, he glanced to his right and saw a group of middle schoolers skateboarding down a driveway, laughing without care. One of them nearly fell, and Malik grinned quietly to himself. He remembered those days, before life got heavy, before his father's funeral, before the conversations about how to stay alive in a traffic stop, before he learned the weight of silence when walking through a store with his hands in his pockets still. Despite it all, Malik didn't carry bitterness, just wisdom, a quiet kind of resilience that wrapped around him like his hoodie. He had learned how to hold space for hope, to guard it like something sacred. He turned left onto Maplewood Avenue. Less than 10 minutes from home, the sun filtered through the trees in golden shards, painting the hood of his SUV in streaks of amber and bronze. He didn't know, at that moment, that another car had begun to follow him. A police cruiser. Just another minute in Hillside Park, just another teen driving home. And yet, something was about to shift. The world, so calm, so quiet, was about to hold its breath. Malik eased on Oak Ridge Boulevard, the town's main stretch, where the trees thinned and the road opened wider. A few cars passed lazily in the opposite direction, headlights flickering in the early dusk. The golden hue of the sky had started to deepen into amber, like the final glow before twilight crept in. His fingers tapped gently on the steering wheel to the rhythm of the podcast still playing. Something about community innovation in underserved neighborhoods. He didn't notice the cruiser at first, just a flicker of movement in his rearview mirror. Then he saw it, a black and white police SUV, trailing behind him at a steady pace. Not speeding, not sirens blaring, just following. Malik's chest tightened slightly, the way it always did in moments like this. He blinked, checked his speed, 32 miles per hour in a 35 zone. Turn signal, used it. Seatbelt on, music low, hands on the wheel. He ran through the mental checklist he'd been taught since he was 12. He took a slow breath and tried not to look back again. Sometimes they passed, sometimes they turned, but this one didn't. A few more blocks passed, and the cruiser stayed, locked behind him like a shadow. Then, without warning, the lights flashed red and blue, strobing across the dashboard like lightning in a summer storm. Malik's heart sank, even as his hands moved calmly. Signal on, pull to the side, park. The SUV slowed to a full stop by the curb, just in front of an old diner with its neon sign buzzing faintly in the background. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned off the ignition. He placed both hands on the steering wheel, in plain sight, just like his father had taught him. Be respectful, son, compliant, clear, make no sudden moves. You do that, you come home. He repeated it in his mind like a prayer. From the cruiser, the door opened and a white officer stepped out, mid-40s, close-cropped hair, square jaw, and the kind of eyes that didn't search, they judged. His name tag read Reynolds. He walked slowly, one hand resting near the holster of his service weapon. Not cautious, possessive. Malik's single quotes as peripheral vision caught the gleam of the badge. The slow swagger of the walk. It wasn't just procedure. There was something else in his posture, coldness, perhaps even irritation. The officer stopped just outside Malik's window and leaned down slightly, eyes sharp and scanning. No greeting, no explanation. Just a blunt, license and registration. Malik nodded politely, not smiling, not challenging. His voice was steady, if a bit soft. Yes, sir. It's in the glove compartment. May I reach for it? Reynolds didn't respond right away, just stared. Then, after a beat, a stiff nod. Malik moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his left hand on the wheel as he opened the compartment. He retrieved the documents and handed them over. His driver's license, registration, insurance card, all in order. The officer looked them over, then looked back at Malik. This your vehicle? Malik swallowed. Yes, sir. It belonged to my father. It's under my name now. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, skepticism practically dripping from his expression. You sure about that? A pause. A flash of something unspoken passed between them, years of assumptions, warnings, and stories Malik had grown up hearing. This was the moment those stories were about. He held Reynolds' gaze, not defiantly, but with the tired kind of clarity that comes from knowing how the world works. Yes, sir. The officer nodded once, clipped and cold, without another word. He turned and walked back to his cruiser, documents in hand. Inside the SUV, Malik let out a slow, controlled breath. His palms were damp, though he hadn't realized he was sweating. He didn't dare reach for his phone. Didn't want to make a single move. The air felt thick, heavy with tension, like the world outside the window had tilted just slightly, off balance and waiting for something to fall. The neon sign from the diner buzzed louder now, or maybe it just seemed that way. The red and blue lights still blinked behind him, casting fractured reflections across the rearview mirror. He could see the officer in the cruiser, looking down at something, maybe the license, maybe the computer, but there was a strange stillness about him. No typing, no radio chatter, just staring. Seconds dragged into minutes. Something was happening, but Malik couldn't tell what. Not yet. The wait dragged on. Malik stared ahead through the windshield, trying to steady his breathing. He kept his hands on the wheel, just as he'd been taught, and let the minutes stretch long, slow, and suffocating. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn sprinkler ticked rhythmically against the sidewalk. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion, while time inside the SUV stood still. Then, the cruiser door creaked open again. The officer was coming back. Malik saw him in the side mirror, his stride slower now, but his eyes no warmer. His face remained unreadable, locked in that same practiced stillness. But Malik could feel it, a shift in the air, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. Officer Reynolds stopped at the window again, and this time, his tone was coated in a syrupy, patronizing edge. So, this your car? Malik turned to him, carefully, Yes, sir. You sure about that? The officer tilted his head slightly, scanning the interior like he was looking for something out of place. Looks a little nice for someone your age. There it was. The unspoken judgment wrapped in a casual phrase, the assumption that a young black teen couldn't possibly own a car this well-maintained unless something was off. Malik swallowed. His jaw tightened for a moment before he forced his shoulders to stay relaxed. It used to be my father's. It's under my name now. MMHMM. The officer's eyes lingered on the dashboard, then flicked back to Malik's face. And where exactly are you headed? Home, sir. Just finished tutoring after school. Reynolds gave a soft, humorless chuckle, almost like a scoff. Tutoring, huh? There was no real question in his voice, just disbelief, dressed in politeness. A deliberate pressing down, not enough to accuse, but enough to degrade. Malik didn't answer that part. He just met the officer's gaze for half a second, then looked down at the wheel again. Always respectful, always careful. The silence stretched for a breath along before Reynolds finally stepped back. Stay put. And just like that, he walked off again. Malik exhaled slowly, watching the officer disappear behind the blinding lights of the cruiser. The sting of the exchange sat heavy in his chest. It wasn't new. None of it was. The suspicion, the doubt, the subtle cuts that didn't leave bruises, but carved deep just the same. He leaned his head back against the seat, eyes scanning the sky above. The golden light was nearly gone now, replaced by long shadows and a darker hue settling in. The sun had slipped behind the treetops. The peace from earlier in the drive had vanished like a mirage dot behind him. Through the mirror, he saw Officer Reynolds sitting in the cruiser, but something was different now. The officer wasn't typing. He wasn't calling anything in. He was just staring at something. Malik shifted slightly in his seat, trying to glimpse what the man was looking at. His license, the registration, the back of the SUV. A minute passed, then the no movement, and then, at last, the door opened again. Officer Reynolds stepped out, but this time, his posture had changed. The arrogance, the casual disdain it had, drained from his face. His walk was slower, almost hesitant. Malik noticed the difference instantly. The officer approached the car with a strange stillness, like a man who'd seen something that shook him. He paused at the back of the SUV, his gaze fixed on the license plate, H3RODAD. His eyes traced the letters, then flicked up to the Purple Heart decal, worn but visible. And for the first time, Officer Reynolds looked unsure. He walked up to the window again, no longer tense, no longer cold. Malik could feel it before the man even spoke. The air had shifted again. The temperature of the moment was no longer oppressive, but something else, something uncertain. Reynolds looked at Malik creepily, looked at him, and the question in his eyes this time was not about the car. It was about connection, recognition, and something that resembled disbelief. He held Malik's ID in one hand, his other hanging loosely at his side. "Thompson," he said quietly, more to himself than to Malik. Malik glanced at him, confused by the sudden change. The officer looked back at the license plate again, his jaw tightening. "Is your father?" he began, voice low, almost cautious. "Colonel Marcus Thompson." Malik blinked. Double quotes. "Yes, sir," he said slowly. He passed away 2 years ago, in Afghanistan." Reynolds stepped back. His face was pale. He swallowed hard, and for the first time that afternoon, he didn't have anything to say. For a long moment, Officer Reynolds didn't move. He stood just behind the tail of the SUV, his eyes fixed on the license plate as if it had suddenly spoken to him. The bright letters glinted in the dimming light. H3RODAD. Above it, worn but still visible, was the small rectangular military decal that marked the vehicle as part of a veteran household. Off to the left, near the edge of the bumper, a faded Purple Heart sticker curled slightly at the corners, its edges worn by years of sun and rain. The officer's gaze didn't waver. He stared like he was trying to reconcile something that couldn't make sense. His lips parted, but no words came out. His hand dropped to his side, no longer near his holster. And for the first time since the stop began, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man haunted. Reynolds blinked, then slowly turned back toward the driver's side window. Malik watched him approach, brows slightly furrowed. He didn't understand the sudden shift, but he felt the energy change again, like a thundercloud had just passed overhead, leaving only the chill in its wake. The officer stopped at the window, glanced down at the ID still in his hand, Then, back in Malik. His voice, when he finally spoke, had lost its edge. It was lower now, tinged with something else, hesitation, maybe even disbelief. Thompson, he said, almost whispering the name, is your father, Colonel Marcus Thompson? Malik's breath caught for just a second. He hadn't expected to hear that name from the man standing outside his window, not like that, not with that tone. He nodded slowly, cautiously. Yes, sir. He was Colonel Marcus Thompson, my dad. There was no bravado in his voice, no prideful swelling of the chest, just a calm answer to a question that suddenly felt far too personal. The officer stepped back again, visibly shaken now. He looked at Malik, then the plate, then back at Malik like he was seeing a ghost or a memory that had been buried deep for too long. He was your father, Reynolds repeated, softer this time. Colonel Thompson, from Kandahar, 2010, Bravo Unit. Malik's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't heard those specific words in a long time. You knew him? He asked. Reynolds didn't answer at first. He took another step back, as if putting physical space between himself and the weight of the realization crashing down on him. Then he nodded once, slow and heavy. He saved my life. The words fell into the air like a stone dropped into a still lake. Simple, final, undeniable. Malik blinked, unsure of what to say. The man standing outside his car, this officer who, just minutes ago, had doubted his right to own a car, questioned his story, his age, his existence, was now unraveling in real time, his voice fragile, his composure crumbling. We were ambushed, Reynolds continued, staring not at Malik, but at something far off, something distant and dusty and soaked in blood. I was pinned behind a transport vehicle, enemy fire coming from every direction. Thought I was done. Then your father. He paused. His voice cracked. He didn't hesitate. He ran into open fire, dragged me out, took a bullet in the process. Malik listened quietly, his fingers loosened from the steering wheel, but he remained still. He remembered his father's medals, the stories told in quiet corners of the house. He knew about the ambush in Kandahar, but he'd never heard this version, this face of it. Reynolds looked down, his breathing uneven. He never talked about it, Malik offered gently, not in detail, but I knew there were people he'd saved. The officer gave a short, broken laugh, more grief than humor. He saved more than people. He saved reputations. He kept men like me from breaking. Another pause, and I just pulled his son over because I didn't think a black kid could drive a clean SUV. The truth of it hung in the silence between them. The guilt washed over Reynolds like cold water. His posture, once rigid and confident, was now bent under the weight of his own regret. He handed Malik's license and registration back with both hands, a subtle but intentional gesture of respect. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. Malik looked at him, and for the first time in the entire interaction, their eyes met without tension, just truth, raw, uncomfortable truth. That's the thing, Malik replied quietly. You never do. There was no venom in his voice, just weariness, honesty. A 17-year-old boy forced to carry more composure than a grown man. Reynolds nodded slowly, then did something Malik didn't expect. He stood back, raised his hand, and gave a full, solemn military salute. Not to Malik, to the license plate, to the memory, to the man who had saved him and now, without knowing it, had just humbled him again. Malik nodded slowly, his voice low, steady. Yes, sir, that's my dad. He passed away 2 years ago, in Afghanistan. He paused for a breath that came heavier than he intended, eyes flicking toward the rearview mirror where the Purple Heart sticker caught a glint of the fading sun. This was his car. The air between them thickened. Malik's words settled like dust after an explosion. Quiet, but devastating. Officer Reynolds took an involuntary step back. His arms hung awkwardly at his sides, the authority that once clung to his uniform now slipping from his shoulders like a burden he no longer had the strength or right to carry. His eyes searched Malik's face again, as if trying to match the features of a teenage boy with the legacy of a man who had once stood in front of bullets for strangers. Reynolds opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. His chest rose and fell as the weight of recognition sank in. He looked back at the car, the same SUV he remembered Colonel Marcus Thompson climbing into after every dusty mission briefing, the same vehicle that had parked near the barracks in Kandahar. always spotless despite the chaos surrounding them. Back then, Thompson kept it pristine not because it mattered, but because discipline was sacred to him. Even in the smallest things, now it was being driven by his son, a son who had just been pulled over for looking out of place in his own father's legacy. Reynolds felt the cold squeeze of shame tighten in his gut. "Your father," he began, voice quieter than before. He is the reason I'm still here." Malik looked at him, eyes widening slightly, but he said nothing. He waited, letting the silence do its work. "I was part of his unit," Reynolds continued. "We were stationed together in Kandahar. I was young, reckless, thought I had something to prove." He gave a dry laugh, half disgust, half sorrow. "It was a routine convoy mission, or at least, it was supposed to be. We got hit. I froze. Couldn't move. Gunfire all around. One of our vehicles was overturned, others pinned down. I remember hearing the shouts, the screams, everything blurring together. And then," he exhaled shakily, "then he came out of nowhere. Colonel Thompson." The name came off his lips with reverence now, like a man speaking at a graveside. "He didn't hesitate. He pulled me out from behind a burning Humvee, took a hit in the leg doing it, still got us both to cover, yelled orders through all that chaos like the war couldn't touch him. He brought us back." Malik didn't flinch. He had heard versions of this story before, though never with this kind of raw emotion. Growing up, his father never boasted. He spoke about war with the same tone he used to teach Malik how to mow the lawn, methodical, grounded, no room for ego. It was always others who told Malik what his dad had done. The soldiers who came to the funeral, the officers who stood rigid, lips tight, eyes glassy, the folded flag handed to his mother. The medals that now sat inside a velvet box in the closet, never displayed, always protected. Reynolds wiped at his brow, more to regain composure than to remove sweat. "I owed him everything. My life, my career, even my family. He got me out so I could come home, marry my wife, raise my kids, and I never got the chance to thank him. Never got to tell him that." Malik sat in silence, staring at the steering wheel for a moment before lifting his gaze. "You just did." Those 3 words were gentle, but heavy, like forgiveness offered before it was asked for. Reynolds nodded, swallowing hard. He looked down at the ID still clutched in his hand, then back at Malik with new eyes, not as a threat, not as a suspect, but as a son, a living extension of the man who had saved his life. A boy carrying the weight of a uniform he never wore, yet still wore its consequences. He stepped back again, visibly smaller now, not in stature, but in pride. Whatever rank or badge he'd once leaned on for authority had been eclipsed by something greater, respect. "I'm sorry," he said again, but this time it wasn't just about the stop. "For not recognizing you, for assuming." Malik nodded once, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "It happens," he replied. "A lot." The words weren't bitter, they were just true. Reynolds didn't try to excuse it. He didn't offer explanations, or mention procedure, or site training. He simply stood there, facing what he'd done, and the man and son he had done it to. And for a second time, with deeper meaning now, he saluted, not for show, but in reverence. A gesture owed, not to Malik, not even just to Marcus Thompson, but to the principle they both lived by: courage in the face of darkness, even when that darkness wore a badge. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The late afternoon light had softened into amber, casting long slanting shadows across the pavement. The golden hue that once bathed the neighborhood was slowly surrendering to dusk, painting the world in hues of rust and memory. Even the street seemed to hold its breath. Officer Reynolds stood with his hand still resting at his side, fingers twitching as though trying to grasp something invisible. His face, once stern and unreadable, now looked hollowed out, his jaw slack, eyes distant, lost somewhere between guilt and reverence. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked, thin and uneven. "I didn't recognize the name." His eyes dropped to Malik's license in his hand, then slowly back to the face in front of him. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pulled you over." He wasn't just saying it to fill the silence. He meant it. Every word came out like it had, scraped through the center of his chest. The weight of his actions settled on him all at once, not just the stop itself, but the assumptions behind it. The unspoken bias, the disbelief that a young black teen could drive his father's car, the slow, automatic erosion of dignity that had become normalized in interactions like these. Reynolds was a man trained in command, in control, in certainty. But here, on this quiet suburban road, standing in front of the son of the man who had saved his life, all of that authority melted away, leaving only remorse. Malik didn't respond at first. He sat still in the driver's seat, both hands relaxed. On the wheel now, he studied Reynolds not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with the worn expression of someone who had lived through too many moments like this. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He was simply tired of being expected to prove that he belonged, tired of having to soften himself to survive, tired of carrying a legacy that the world refused to see unless it was spelled out in metal plates and faded military decals. He let the silence stretch a little longer, not to punish, but to let the moments speak louder than either of them could. Then, quietly, he spoke. "You wouldn't be the first." His voice wasn't accusatory, but it held a truth that couldn't be ignored. It was the kind of sentence that lingered, simple but immovable. Reynolds took a step back, eyes dropping. He nodded slowly, as if the weight of Malik's words landed exactly where they should have on the part of him that had chosen suspicion over curiosity. A gust of wind rustled the leaves on the sidewalk. The fading sun kissed the top of the cruiser, throwing a red and gold shimmer across its windshield. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, distant and irrelevant. Time seemed to pause to generations. Two men, bound not by similarity, but by legacy. One forged by sacrifice, the other tested by inheritance. Reynolds straightened slightly. His hand twitched at his side. Then, after a long breath, he raised his right hand again, not to intimidate, not out of protocol, but with the full weight of gratitude, recognition, and apology, a slow, full military salute. To Marcus Thompson, to the boy he left behind, to the truth that had come full circle on a suburban street he never walked. Malik didn't return the salute. That wasn't his language. That had been his father's world, not his. Instead, he gave a small, respectful nod. Then, he turned the key. In the ignition, the engine hummed softly, calm, steady, familiar. He signaled, checked his mirrors, and merged slowly back into the street. As the SUV rolled forward, the license plate caught the light one last time. H3RODAD, bold and unassuming, yet powerful, enough to stop a man in his tracks. Officer Reynolds stood on the side of the road, watching the taillights disappear around the corner, swallowed into the descending dusk. He remained still, as if somehow trying to absorb what had just happened, what he had just learned, what he had nearly missed. Behind him, the flashing cruiser lights faded into stillness, and in that quiet, something shifted. Not in the world, at least, not yet, but in one man. A man who would never again see a teenage boy in a hoodie as just a suspect. A man who had finally thanked his savior through his son. As the last of the daylight faded into soft indigo, the street that had held so much weight just minutes before now lay quiet again. The only evidence of what had occurred was the faint smell of dust on the air, the lingering warmth on the asphalt, and the silence that follows a revelation too big to be spoken aloud. The SUV stay, unhurried, had already disappeared around the bend, taking with it a story that would live in neither headlines nor reports, but in memory. Inside that car sat a 17-year-old boy, Malik Thompson, calm, thoughtful, raised by a soldier who believed in purpose, and a mother who taught him how to survive it. He hadn't shouted, hadn't demanded, hadn't needed to. He had carried a legacy without even speaking its name. Behind him, Officer Reynolds remained still, the echo of the salute still in his shoulder. His hands lowered slowly to his sides, but his mind stayed elevated and moored by the weight of his own assumptions. He had pulled over a young man because he didn't believe he could belong, because the hoodie, the skin, the age, the car, all added up to suspicion in a mind not yet rid of its quiet prejudice. But it took a license plate, a few characters, and a memory to unravel the lens he'd been seeing through in a world quick to judge by appearance. Sometimes it takes a second look to see the full story. That day, on a sunlit street in Hillside Park, the truth had arrived without a fight. It came in the form of a name, a memory, and a son simply driving home. The license plate H3RODAD wasn't chosen to impress. It wasn't vanity or nostalgia. It was a tribute, a badge of honor on four wheels, a quiet reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or even uniforms. Sometimes they're fathers. Sometimes they're gone too soon, and sometimes they leave behind sons who carry more than just their name. Malik didn't need to tell the officer who he was. The truth spoke for itself, and Reynolds, hardened by years of routine, shaped by a system that rewarded quick decisions and reinforced silent biases, had been forced, for the first time in a long while, to pause, to ask himself a question too many men in his position never get around to asking. What if I'm wrong? What if the story isn't what I assumed? What if the kid in the hoodie isn't a threat? What if that face in the driver's seat is more familiar than I think? It wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a collision between perception and reality, between who someone is and how the world decides to see them. The sun was gone now, swallowed by evening. The sky above glowed dimly, stars beginning to emerge like timid truths after a storm. Malik didn't look back. He didn't need to. What mattered wasn't behind him anymore. Inside his chest was the steady beat of a young heart raised by sacrifice and shaped by quiet strength. He didn't carry his father's medals on his chest, but in his presence, in how he spoke, in how he held his dignity through discomfort. That day, he had done nothing more than exist, and that, in itself, had been enough to expose a buried bias, enough to humble a man who thought he already knew how the world worked. The license plate was a legacy, the boy a reminder, and the cop a man forced to confront his own bias face to face. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in a slow moment between the people who never meant to cross paths. Sometimes it comes when silence speaks louder than accusation, when a nod is more powerful than an argument, and when a son honors a father simply by sitting behind the wheel and going home. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits until someone's finally willing to look twice.